For decades, film historians have implied that the British film industry of the silent era was a non-entity and not worth analysing, with the obvious exception of Alfred Hitchcock. While the master of suspense was creating a stir with his first masterpiece, The Lodger, another British director made 3 notable films that have only been recognised for their greatness in the past decade. Anthony Asquith had a varied and lengthy career, from war films to film adaptations of stage plays and all-star melodramas. Yet critics were rarely excited by his directorial work. British critic David Thompson once described Asquith as a dull journeyman, merely a supervisor of the transfer to the screen of proven theatrical properties. However, at the start of his career, Asquith arguably directed 3 of the best films from Britain's silent era: Shooting Stars, Underground, and Cottage on Dartmoor. In the 1920s, Asquith truly stood out as the first member of the British establishment to enter the film industry. He was the youngest son of the wartime Prime Minister Herbert Asquith, moving into Downing Street at the age of 6. Latterly, he was an Oxford graduate. So Asquith would have been expected to follow a traditional career for a member of the upper class. Yet the young Asquith was attracted to the then disreputable cinema industry. One of the founding members of the London Film Society, Asquith would immerse himself in world cinema, especially the films coming out of Germany and Russia. In the mid-1920s, Asquith travelled to Hollywood and stayed at the legendary Pick Fair, home to Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford. With Pickford's help, Asquith visited film sets and gained a hands-on education in film production. By the time he had returned home, Asquith was ready to direct, despite a few raised eyebrows. A satire on the tedious pretentiousness of movie stars and the scandals that rocked Hollywood throughout the 1920s, Shooting Stars was Asquith's first film, made in collaboration with A.V. Bramble in 1928. The older man was considered more of a mentor, as the movie is Asquith's baby. He served as screenwriter, and recently discovered notes show that he planned every shot. Asquith had admired the cinema from Germany, and it shows on the screen, especially with the chiaroscuro lighting. In fact, he opted to employ the notable German lighting technician Karl Fischer to light his silent films. Shooting Stars is what would now be termed a piece of meta cinema. With his tongue firmly in its cheek, Shooting Stars serves as a unique peek behind the scenes of film production. There's one particular scene where the actors leave their Western set to watch a slapstick film in production. It's reminiscent of a similar scene in Singing in the Rain. However, while the latter plays it for laughs and is a simple tracking shot, Shooting Stars boldly follows the characters with an inventive crane shot that lasts nearly 2 minutes. It demonstrates the artificiality of movie making. It may be a buzzing hive of creativity, but the studio is merely a factory floor. Annette Benson plays May Feather, a leading lady with sex and murder in mind. She is a compelling femme fatale, and there is a surprising and atmospheric build-up of sexual tension in the seduction scenes. In his first 3 films, Asquith was interested in exploring relationships, exploiting the motif of the love triangle to explore themes of sexual jealousy, class divisions, and the thirst for power. In Shooting Stars, the love triangle is subverted, with May married to a handsome leading man in the form of Brian Aherne, while her secret lover is an older, not conventionally attractive comedian. However, all the points of this particular triangle are self-obsessed, vainly gazing upon their images, be it on the screen or in a mirror. Throughout the film, there is a gradual build-up of tension and suspense, initially with how the love affair will be exposed, and latterly when we realise May resolves to avoid scandal by pursuing a deadly path. The film is paced well with a few surprise twists and turns, and is an impressive debut that drips with enthusiasm. We can clearly see the influence of German staging and Russian editing, specifically when Donald Calthrop's Andy Wilkes shoots a scene at the beach. Just to note that while Asquith stayed in Hollywood, he visited the set of Charlie Chaplin's film The Circus, and one can't help but compare Wilkes with the Tramp. Apparently, Charlie Chaplin and Asquith argued over the trapeze scene in E.A. Dupont's Variety, where the unchained camera swung high above an audience. Now, Chaplin thought it was a cheap trick and rejected it, but Asquith loved it and expertly employs it in Shooting Stars to build tension. The employment of the unchained camera, or a swinging camera, alongside the juxtaposition of slapstick comedy and the growing recognition of danger, creates a growing suspicion and a nauseating sense of dread. While this film is nearly 100 years old, it's an indictment of the fallacy and hubris of celebrity that still rings true today. With exciting camera work and great pacing and engaging plot, this is an impressive debut. Underground is Asquith's first credited work and is frankly my favourite out of the three. Stepping away from the glamorous world of Shooting Stars, Asquith decided with his following two films to depict the lives of normal working class people, a world familiar to the average cinema goer. Focusing on this group may have been considered unusual considering Asquith's upper class background, but he seemed to embrace the experience. While being the son of a former Prime Minister had its perks, especially getting to shoot in the underground after hours, Asquith often rejected his privileged background and increasingly lived a humble life. He was a regular commuter on the underground, and he regularly socialised with his film crew in pubs that were not too dissimilar to Bert's local in the film. Underground is a celebration of 20th century modernity, and at points it's visually reminiscent of Fritz Lang's Metropolis. There's an exciting, energetic buzz beneath the streets of London, which successfully serves as a backdrop to a romance and latterly as an expressionistic thriller. The then relatively new invention of the escalator is employed to significant effect, from the comedy of commuters misunderstanding how to use moving stairs, the setting of an adorable meet cute, and latterly the location of an alleged assault. The escalator, like the underground, like the city, bustles continuously, never stopping until the final crucial moments when the villain, Bert, played by Cyril MacLachlan, commits his final ghastly crime, and the underground is dramatically plunged into darkness and confusion. Once again, the plot revolves around a deadly love triangle, or rather a quadrangle. The film's exploration of male-female relationships was actually an eye-opener for me and feels surprisingly relevant today, especially when one considers the Me Too movement of the last 5 years. The film opens with Bert, a power station electrician, encountering and making undesirable advances towards Nell, played by Elisa Nlandi. This is a scenario that I'm sure a lot of women today can identify with. However, Bert's continuous entitled demands that Nell goes out with him are firmly rejected. Nell is surprisingly feisty, but clear. She's not interested. Nell is a strong, tough female character and knows what she wants, and she's going to go out and get it. Perhaps she is a little less extravagant than the flappers or vamps in Hollywood films, but she is relatable, with a distinctly modern sensibility. The performances are exciting, especially Nora Barrig as the neglected Kate, Bert's one-time lover, manipulated into accusing Bill. While her actions are recognised as appalling and pathetic, she generates some sympathy and the character's fate is genuinely tragic. Asquith's direction as Kate slowly loses her mind is excellent and complements her twitchy anxiety. Bert's gradual evolution from everyday creep to murderous maniac is fascinating and doesn't seem rushed. His increasingly destructive schemes are compelling to watch but somehow believable, and MacLachlan remains subtle. Hare and Lassie also make a genuinely sweet couple going through the first flush of love. Their journey on the bus and their picnic seems like a slice of 1920s life. Underground is a perfect blending of genres, starting as a sweet romantic comedy and with Asquith successfully subverting the plot into a tense thriller. I think this film is a serious rival to Hitchcock's The Lodger, mainly because it's suspenseful with strong characters and visually stunning locations. Both the Underground and Lots Road power station are used to atmospheric effect. 1929's A Cottage on Dartmoor is almost the antithesis of Underground. If the visual grandeur of machinery and crowds isn't your thing, then perhaps the enchanting allure of Dartmoor at Twilight is. I would argue that the opening moments of this 1929 film are amongst the most stunningly photographed from Britain's silent era. Filmed on location, the bewitching craggy landscape of Dartmoor is utilised to full spellbinding effect. The setting sun beautifully shimmering in a stream, the threatening shadows and the jagged boulders contrast beauty with menace and adds a sense of mystery and dread. The film opens with a desperate convict escaping the infamous Dartmoor prison, staggering amongst the crags as he spies an isolated cottage. The opening few minutes has an almost otherworldly feel, evocative of the ancient myths this mysterious landscape has conjured up for centuries. A Cottage in Dartmoor also resembles Murnau's Sunrise with its dark fatalistic atmosphere and melancholic rustic visuals. The film then cuts between the cottage's interior, where a young woman bathes her infant, and inside the prison, where the convict's absence is realised. Asquith is subtly building tension in a manner reminiscent of Hitchcock. The discovery of the escape calls back to an appearance of Ivor Novello in The Lodger. The young mother enters the kitchen area and in a dark corner she comes face to face with the convict. The chiaroscuro lighting is haunting. We don't know if she will scream or he will attack. Neither happens, as it becomes apparent that the mother knows the man, and the film immediately cuts to a flashback. Asquith's story once again contains a love triangle and shows a catastrophe that stems from sexual jealousy. The story's protagonist is Joe, played by Uno Henning, a barber who's in love with his colleague Sally, a manicurist. Sally does not return his feelings, though she pities him and reluctantly agrees to go on an awkward one-off date. A misunderstanding involving flowers falsely gives Joe hope as he sinks into obsession. However, Sally, once again played by Nora Baring, is attracted to the jocular Harry, a customer who is likewise smitten. Joe, increasingly showing signs of unhealthy obsession, stalks the pair as they visit a cinema. This scene is a fascinating illustration of what was happening to cinema at this time, as Harry and Sally are specifically there to watch a talkie. The film's mise-en-scene is clearly drawing upon German film, however it's Asquith's experimental use of montage that is notable in Cottage on Dartmoor. Inspired by the Soviet theories of tonal and intellectual montage, Asquith attempted to demonstrate that visuals could say much more than words. Throughout the film, Asquith utilises visuals to signify sound. For example, when he cuts random clips of sports, politicians and chickens to indicate barber, customer, small talk. The cinema scene is a lengthy, fascinating sequence which is a direct commentary on what was the then new trend of talking pictures. The episode initially shows a fast-paced montage with the jazz band enthusiastically playing as the supporting feature plays. We don't see the screen, but Asquith focuses on the lively audience reacting to the film. The scene is rhythmically edited. The audience laugh, flinch, are engrossed, interact. It's a vigorous collection of magical moments cutting between the spectators. Suddenly, the feature starts. The musicians put down their instruments and eat sandwiches and play cards. Perhaps this foreshadows the mass redundancy for their real-life counterparts. The audience shift positions and lean in to intently listen to the film. One man sleeps. A Harold Lloyd lookalike, played by Asquith, abruptly leaves, but most watch the film. The cuts between the viewers have slowed considerably in pace, and we see the spectators' manners change. The way films have been viewed has altered forever, and some of the excitement is lost as a result. At this early stage in the sound era, perhaps this film was trying to demonstrate that there was still some life and joy in the old, that possibly talkies and silent cinema could coexist. Unlike the previous films, Asquith frames the shunned, envious character sympathetically. Harry and Sally's open affection crushes Joe. We see his inner turmoil with an intellectual montage sequence, a snapped wire, explosions, and we have a strikingly red blank screen. Then Joe cuts Harry. While Sally weeps and tends to her beloved, understandably she verbally assaults her pathetic colleague, who vows revenge on both. Cutting back to the cottage, Asquith builds a sense of dreaded tension, which again is reminiscent of Hitchcock. The house, like the moor, is full of ominous shadows, and Uno Henning is photographed in a foreboding manner, which calls back to Ivor Novello in The Lodger. We don't know if Joe will kill Sally or beg forgiveness. He is pathetic and sad and ultimately pays the price. Where it might stray into improbability is with Sally and Harry's forgiveness and their deep pity for Joe, even leaving him with their infant son at one point. It's this melodrama that might make a modern audience balk. However, the ending gives the story a tragic idiosyncrasy. Joe's realisation that the couple are genuinely happy. Sally has chosen a decent man, and the fact the couple are willing to forgive him means he feels he has nothing else to live for. A Cottage in Dartmoor is a simple story about the euphoria of falling in love, but the absolute devastation of unrequited love and the despair of loneliness. Despite Asquith's hope that silent and sound films could coexist, A Cottage in Dartmoor would be one of the last silent films made in Britain. Asquith would make his first sound film 2 years later and spend the next few years drifting from one studio to the other. Unlike Hitchcock, who quickly adapted to sound and was popular with audiences, Asquith's 3 silent films were considered too arty, too European for British tastes, with contemporary critics dismissing them. Eventually, Asquith gained a reputation as a reliable director, with the bulk of his work being dialogue-heavy adaptations or star-studded melodramas. However, reliability doesn't equate excitement or innovation. In Asquith's later films, it's the scripts or performers that sparkle, rarely the direction. Sadly, his first 3 films would remain forgotten by cinephiles until well after his death. And it's only in recent years the trilogy has been rediscovered, reassessed and celebrated as the treasures they are. I would argue that Asquith's silent output doesn't merely rival Hitchcock's, but consistently improves on it, with each film feeling more modern and relevant today than many of Hitchcock's British films. Shooting Stars, A Cottage on Dartmoor and Underground are all available from the BFI. If you're a silent film fan that has avoided British films for fear that it would be too stuffy or dull, I really recommend that you check these films out. Asquith's film literacy, his storytelling, balancing of comedy, suspense, melodrama, and ability to capture 1920s Britain and translate it to a modern audience is genuinely enthralling. I urge silent film fans to watch Asquith's films, as they truly should be remembered and celebrated.